Hey, what's up, guys? I want to welcome you back to episode 46 of Street Theology. Episode 46, 1982-83. One of my favorite baseball players wore this number. Don Mattingly for the New York Yankees, who switched to number 23. Growing up, I collected baseball cards. And
really?
Don Mattingly was my guy. Wore 46 in 82-83. So the Don Mattingly Rookie Year podcast is here today. So we're in
baseball.
Right
I thought,
now.
I
thought it was going to be basketball, football.
No,
so you're a well-rounded man. Okay.
I'm a well-rounded man.
Little
right.
Little known fact.
Never gets that.
Never in a million years.
Next we'll find out he collected things about like golf or tennis too.
You golf though?
I do golf some, yes.
Incredible.
Yeah. And I used to play tennis too a little bit.
Not every pastor has to golf.
That is true. Not every pastor does have to golf. It is true. And so I don't play as much, again. So, but guys, we are excited. The voices you hear, those voices. If you've been here at Street Theology, Pastor Derek Hayes, what's happening, sir?
What's happening? What's good, people?
Not a whole lot. And again, as well, Michelle Warner. Michelle, how are you?
I'm good. I feel like I took a little hiatus there for a little bit.
Yeah,
I'm back.
There we go. You know what? Somebody used to do podcasts with a family member. We say extended family, Dina. You know what I'm saying? Me and Billy used to always make fun of Dina. You know what I'm saying? Because Dina would be on for like 3 episodes, then gone for like 14. And you're like, all right, well. So anyway, shout out to Dina if you listen to the pod. So, but family, we are super excited today about this podcast. This is something we have been waiting to do and to have this again. And I'll tell you a little bit more about our guest in a second, the interview that we did with him. But we want to encourage you again, Street Theology. The main point here is simply this. We want to bring theology to a street level. Again, it's about launching innovative reconcilers really into the world. And so we do that here at Street Theology, to take difficult concepts, bring them down into just our everyday lives. And so I want to encourage you, man, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you give us a rating. Leave us a review. Also, man, jump on the YouTube, the Engage Church YouTube channel. Where you can watch these live, and it's not live, but you can actually watch these recorded. And so we're super excited about all the stuff we're bringing. And so, man, today we are excited. We have somebody by the name of A.D. Thomason who's going to be on the podcast. And how we became familiar with A.D. Thomason is that he wrote a book called Permission to Be Black. You know what I'm saying? What he learned from Jesus and Jay-Z. If you know anything about me, I saw them like, those two people I rock with. You know what I'm saying? So I was like, I got to read this book. And as I opened up the book, let me tell you this. I have had very few books in my life where I was able to sit down in one sitting. I literally read the book in one night, and it was powerful. Again, a little bit about A.D. Again, he's an award-winning filmmaker, author. This book, Permission to Be Black. And again, what he talks a lot about is this idea of just really culture and really just the idea of one of the things he talks about is the waking up of just in his own life, you know what I'm saying, being a black man and really started the idea of practicing Jesus. And so he jumps a lot in really deep, and this really his book, and we're going to dive into this today, is all about this idea of what he learned about Jesus and mental health, and that's a huge thing, we talk a lot about here. He talks a lot about cheat codes and things like that, because ultimately it's rare, and especially, you're going to hear from this. I think it's important as a black man to not only be a follower of Jesus, but then also to be someone who is who actually has got the tools and what he calls the cheat codes to be like mentally, emotionally healthy. So real quick before, we jump into the interview with AD, I kind of want to hear you guys' quick thoughts about the book, about AD, why you're excited really fast.
I think I'm excited simply because what you just said, the idea that it's rare for a black Jesus follower also, be mentally, emotionally healthy, and I love the fact that he's trying to reverse that. That's the whole book of, hey, he says it so many times, I want to give my people these cheat codes in life, and he feels like with technology and all this kind of stuff, things that were once kind of hidden away from us a little bit are now available, and so why not?
Yeah. I think one of the things that he talked about was how historically the Black community has been known by how well they tolerate pain. And so being able to teach people how to express your pain in a healthy way and not let things just build up and explode and be a whole integrated person, I feel like, except for you, and Doc, those are the only people I hear talk about it, but not specifically Black men. And so I think it's such a resource for the Black community. So I'm excited for it.
It's going to be exciting. So guys, check out this interview with A.D. Thomason. guys, we are excited, as you guys heard, to have A.D. Thomason on the pod. A.D., what's happening, man?
What's going on? It's good to be here.
Glad to have you here. So we're going to jump right into it. But before we jump into this pod and get into, again, we told Permission to Be Black. This is the thing. Top 5, the most important thing, top 5 Jay-Z albums of all time. Before all the rest of the spiritual stuff we're going to get to. But the most important question, because this is going to be a real judgment thing of what I think about you. Your top 5 Jay-Z albums of all time. So top 5.
My top 5, well, I feel like if you're a Jay-Z fan, you got to start with Reasonable Doubt, only because that's like 2 decades of his life.
Yep.
Right. And I think with any art, you can't remove the purity, the virginness of what it means to just get behind a microphone and tell my story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So even though, you may say like, yo, the Brandon was better on the Black album, or, you can talk about it, but if you're just talking about Jay-Z, you got to go Reasonable Doubt,
All right.
So yeah, I'm gonna put Black Album on there. You know what? I'm gonna put 444 in the top 5.
Hey, listen. Listen.
That mature Jay-Z.
I'm listening. I tell people, that's that. I tell people that's the Jay-Z right now. You got, you got to pay taxes to listen to that Jay-Z. Yeah. That ain't illegal dope money, Jay-Z. You know what I'm saying? Like, in my lifetime, that's brown paper bag under your mattress, drug money, Jay-Z. Hey, you got to be able to. You got to have a shower where you can actually do you can do a jab step in your shower. You got to be that big. Listen to that, Jay-Z. You know what I'm saying? Yo, 444 that was a piece of work. That was an incredible piece of art right there, man.
And like I said in the book, Andre 3000 is gonna be my stand. Jay-Z is my objective pick because of him being able to be relevant, evolve, right? And I feel like he don't rap in the past, if that makes sense. Like he realizes like, yo, I'm not in the street anymore.
Yeah.
And people still want to listen to him. So I would throw 444 in there. I definitely would throw Blueprint in there. Ask Nas, he don't want it with Hov. No,
absolutely.
It's just like, yo, he just went there on that dude, So I definitely throw that in there. And I will put a sleeper on there, American Gangster. I would throw that in there.
You know what, man? I read your book and I was like, man, I would connect this dude. We're good. We are 100% because we are good. Because as soon as you said that last one, because American Gangster, and I know we'll get into it. Everybody they want some more spiritual conversation, but this is spiritual because American Gangster. I'll never forget when I heard it. I never knew. And what I think people don't ever give Jay-Z credit for is what he was able to, like you said, he done rap in the past to evolve. I didn't know what grown folk rap was. And so I heard American Gangster. I'm like, oh, that's grown folk rap. That's the you've matured into a different level type of rap. And now you're seeing these guys who are in their 40s, even 50s. I mean, watching the resurrection right now of Nas, and what he's been doing. Ooh. And with that album, Good Night, both of them. But watching him and what he's done, but it's been a guy, but Jay-Z has paved that way. That's why I was telling people, I think he's the best of all time just because, again, the longevity. I mean, my man's in his 50s and still punching with whoever he wants to. And and to be in that art form. So, I appreciate that. Oh, no, we're good. We can keep the podcast going now. You know what I'm saying? So we good to go with the podcast. So, all right, Michelle, you got it. Let's do it.
No, actually,
you got it first.
Yeah,
right.
No, actually, AD, I wanted to jump into this idea. What's in the title? So not necessarily the part about Jesus and Jay-Z, but why call it Permission to Be Black? I mean, that I read the book and that just struck me. What are you trying to communicate?
Yeah, more of a historical. If I had to summarize it, separating our trauma as people of color from the results that we've justified why we don't give ourselves permission to be our fullest selves, right? So, like, say for instance, if you look at the story of Step and Fetch It, I'm helping write another book, and we don't understand what was going on during those times. He's just become a moniker in the word. Like, man, don't be no Step and Fetch It, don't be no Sambo. Mm-hmm. But you got to remember at the time, he was the first Black millionaire, and he is actually a flamboyant personality. And he felt for during that time to actually eat and provide for himself, he took on this moniker, though outside of, what you saw in film, that's not who he was. Mm-hmm. And it's easy for us to read our current freedoms back into history's traumatic times. Yeah. Right. And then it's also easy for us to read history or bring history's traumatic prisons into the present time. So it's like, man, hey, AD, you understand, bro, I got to do this. I go, what? Because they're going to lynch you? They don't lynch you anymore. Right. So, right, yeah. So you don't have to worry about doing the Great Migration and things like that. You may not get a Jay-Z level of success, but let's keep it 100. If I'm gonna pick any country to be a black man in, I'm gonna pick America. Hey. Mm-hmm. Now just think about that. I'm sorry, I'm not gonna pick like Ghana and the South Africas, and I've been there and they're great, and I like visiting there. Shout out to my people. I got on the North Ghanaian swag as we speak. But they are honest in talking to me. When I talk to the bishops over there, they're like, yo, I'm gonna keep it 100. Yeah, we'll receive y'all, but everybody won't. Because y'all don't speak the language. Some is just gonna see you as people who got colonized over in the white man's land. And then I always respond, I'm like, yo.
One notch. Yeah.
But and I appreciate you sharing that. And I think, kind of going into that, I love how you communicate that, because I think in this current moment, I kind of want to get a little bit more, you go a little bit deeper into that, where we live in a world to where it's like, two things can equally be true. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. To where like, that's one thing that's really hard. Like you just say like, oh, as a black man, I don't live nowhere else. But there's also issues here. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. So like kind of go into that a little bit more, because like that's a lot of time, because you'll hear people, I've sat and, one of the things I do outside of pastoring, I have a consulting company. So we work with Fortune 500 companies, and we do a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion. And that's one of the things that'll happen for some of the CEOs I deal with. I had one said that, well, this is the best, best place it's ever been or be for somebody black throughout history. And I'm like, yeah, it still don't mean like that it can't get better. Yeah. So kind of unpack that a little bit more, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I think that's good. So here's the thing I always try to sober myself to while I say, I would prefer to live in America out of all these countries. Like, America isn't perfect. If you study history, even if you study the present day, when people bring out the Breonna Taylors, George Floyds, and things like that, got it. And it's true. I mean, I learned BJJ, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and got a blue belt because of the George Floyd video within 10 months. It's supposed to take 2 years. So you're not talking to a person who's not taking in the times, right? Because I told my wife, I said, if it goes down, I'm not going down with a knee on my neck. So y'all not listening to a dude who's saying like, yo, America is great and we don't have nothing to worry about. I go, no, I know BJJ. I carry a knife around my neck. I got 2 guns. I got 3 crossbows and a compound bow. So you're not talking to a dude that's
okay,
willy-nilly out here, just floating around. But I say all this, I try to live sober though. I went to the Equal Justice Initiative Legacy Museum in Montgomery. And I go, there's certain things we have to be sober that they aren't present anymore. And that's where I feel like people are unfair when they tell the narrative of the plight of the black man or plight of the black woman. I go, we talk as if we're doing freedom rides. We don't do freedom rides. We're not getting hit with spiked bats no more. We're not getting sprayed down with water hoses anymore. Right? Is there more work? Yes, but it's not the same work as the past. And that's how we try. That's how we tend to communicate. Like I'm looking at thousands of names that none of us will ever know that died in obscurity hanging from trees at the Equal Justice Initiative Legacy Memorial of people who got lynched. I go, we not going to be able to read all those names. But guess what? I own property in Georgia with woods and acres where I know my ancestors got lynched on those trees. It's not the same, right? And what people have to not fall victim to is there's money to be made with tension remaining. And I don't think people realize that. I think Christians can sometimes be the worst at thinking that the world wants tension to cease. No, they make more money in war, and they make more money when groups fight. So what I do is I try to stay sober and say, yes, are people filming situations with Black men and women that are being killed? Yes. But since all the situations that happened from Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, fast forward to Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland, George Floyd, there's not been one time I walked out of my house, I've driven, or I've been to a place where that has occurred on me. But if I take in all those videos, I start to embody to think that it's going to be around the corner more than it is. And those are the delineations people need to make. Like, well, that could be me. It's like the joke what Chris Rock said. People always like, man, you got to live for the day because you may not make it to tomorrow. You might get hit by a bus. And he goes, but chances are you ain't going to get hit by it's like, you're going to go to sleep and you're going to wake up. The high statistics aren't in the favor, right? So I try to soberly say, like, what is the word? And anybody who knows me knows that I'm going to be a prophet from the streets, but I want to be sober about what I'm talking about, not fanatical,
Yeah. I just want to piggyback off that a little bit and ask do you think that some of that connecting to, hey, I'm still kind of connecting that it's still like that back in civil rights and before Jim Crow, is that to the point of your book, is that some of the unreleased trauma that people are still connecting and making it like it is today, and it's really not?
Yeah, I think that is. And I think that's the problem is we have so much trauma in our bodies, and neuroscientists will say that trauma can be passed down at the cellular level. So that's why I tell that story in the book about the woman who's pregnant, and we always talk about NATO care in the sense of what she eats, but we don't talk about the emotions, but they're starting to dive into the emotional reality of what mom is going through. Now I just say you take all that and you add that up and you keep going for like slave trade and then auction blocks and then sharecropping and lynching. Like you just take it forward and you got all these things where we've never had the freedom. And when I say freedom, I'm talking about I'm not talking about a justice system. I'm talking about justice, that which is due a person, and I don't have to go to the system to affirm my humanity.
Yeah.
Right.
So I would actually argue we're so traumatized, we focus too much on the justice system and not on justice, that which is due us. Right. So just think about that. Like, why do we celebrate, like, hey, she was the first African-American woman to get this degree, or he was the first African-American man to do this? We don't celebrate breathing, but we're so traumatized. That's how we celebrate things. Like it's not, I shouldn't need a system to be able to breathe, but that's how traumatized we are. We do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
It's like civil rights come after human declaration. That's why the United Nations came into being. Think about that. Civil rights come after human declaration, but we're so focused on civil rights because we're so traumatized at the human level. Like, well, at least let me get a degree. At least let me get a house. I'm like, bro, those that's breathing.
Yeah.
Man, that's strong.
So what does it look like? Because you started unpacking a little bit in terms of how trauma affects the body, and you talk about it a lot in your book. I want you to unpack that a tiny bit more, but I also want you to speak to what it looks like to move past just breathing. Like, how do we heal? How do we speak life to each other? Like, how do we be a whole integrated person without necessarily depending on the system to do it for us?
Yeah. So I think one thing, I think the first thing when you look at what power and oppression does.
Mm-hmm.
It makes the person who's oppressed really believe the person who's the oppressor controls life and death. And I'm not using that as a metaphor. I'm literally using it literally. So true oppression makes the person who's oppressed believe that the oppressor controls life and death. Now, I just want you to think that. Lay that on America, people of color, and the slave trade. That's what we've embodied. So they control life and death, so I got to be Sambo. They control life and death, so I got to put on this woman's dress in Hollywood. They control life and death, so I can't really say what I want to say. I got to take it all out on my wife, Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin interview. I can't really say what I want to say, so I take it out on my kids. So the first thing we have to detach ourselves from, and this is very tough when you've been traumatized. We got to remove life and death subconsciously and then consciously from the power of whites. And listen to me, in 2021, we have not done that. People say what they want to all day long. We talk like, man, I'm here in this structure. I just believe God is going to use me to speak the power. I go, they not power. God is.
Wow.
Going back to the Pilate point, we give too much credit to Pilate as if God only moves through Pilate instead of him existing outside of Pilate. So therefore, we're so traumatized that we believe he only moves through what I call the white systems, right? Because, I mean, if you look at history from an earthly standpoint, I can see why somebody draws that conclusion because, you know, the whites come here from Europe. They do what they do to the Native Americans. They build the 13 colonies. They declare their coup or revolution. And now we have the United States. Everything's happy, right? And for some reason, God has allowed them to maintain what we would call a grip on the resources. But even still, if you look at history, it's replete with God showing that he supersedes that power structure, any power structure. I mean, Assyria, Babylon, even though you say, well, at last, he still brings it down. Right? Or he still elevates people within. He still takes Nebuchadnezzar's mind. He still puts Joseph atop Egypt. He still takes Pharaoh's firstborn to say, no, Pharaoh, you don't control life and death. I do. Right? And I feel like people of color who have what I would call a prophetic edge, they temper it because they really believe, metaphorically speaking, Pharaoh controls life and death. And so for them, we don't talk about this, but creatively, we don't talk about did every person who was an Israelite in Egypt put blood on the doorpost? Do we believe that? We assume that. But I believe some people believe Pharaoh had the power of life and death. So it's like, I ain't putting that on there. Like,
wow.
And how do we know that to be true? Fast forward. What did the people say in John 11:48? We need to kill this man, lest Rome come and take away our people and our temple. Now, to me, I go, God is the one that gave you your people and your temple, Genesis 12, 15 and 17. But now you're giving the power to Rome, and that's what we do.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the land and plane, we have to disassociate giving the power to these structures. And when we do that, we then become our fullest selves and we lead the results to God. But when you traumatize, you get a power of life and death to someone else, you won't be full of self because you don't think if I'm my full of self, that I won't be able to eat. And then it creates that cycle of trauma in your body. I want to get free, but I don't think there's a power to free me.
Wow.
Man.
Let me tell you this. Y'all need to go back and hit that back button. You know what I'm saying? Multiple times and go back and put that thing on one speed.
Don't go 1.5.
Don't go 1.5.
Right.
Go
Just go
two.
one speed on that. Like
0.75.
Yeah. That was a full meal he just gave y'all. No, and here's the reason why I appreciate that is because of over the last, probably 8 years. That's really been a lot of the journey I've had because again, it was the prophetic edge. We are here. I'm in the South. I'm a black man in the South with a church that is split right down the middle politically, ethnically. It's the fact that, I lead a, you know, it's like a bivocational, and there's all stuff you couldn't do, and I'm more of a prophet. I mean, I tell people pretty much at the end of every Sunday you show up, it's gonna pretty much, I'm gonna tell you, like, we all suck and Jesus is awesome. Like, that's pretty much all my sermons come back to that, no matter what I talk about.
It's true.
But I know, but it's what you're saying. I think even still, as I'm even starting to, I think, wake up even more, is this reality of, like, man, so many times when you said the power structure, I think it's so important, because you're like, man, you don't, as I'm a 6'6" black man, you're always like, man, I didn't even realize for so long how you walk in a room, you naturally take a backdrop because you don't want to be too much. You don't. Yeah, you come in, and then you don't realize how much that affects you. Or, like, I was telling people how it affects you when my father told me, hey, like, you talk about being the first. My father was the first black basketball coach at the University of Akron. I was like, I watched my father do that, and I watched the trauma when my father did everything he's supposed to do. He just didn't win enough games, which I understand the game of basketball. I understand, like, it's about wins. But watching my father pick me up from school when he told me he was resigning, and the two things he said to me, and it was one thing, he's like, man, I'm sorry I disappointed you, and I feel like I disappointed our people. And I'm like, as a 17-year-old kid, watching your father put the whole weight of a culture on his back, I'm like, that does something to you. And I think now you walk into a room sometimes thinking you're less than, just because you're like, you've been taught this stuff. And I'm realizing, like, what? No, I'm not. You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, and none of these people have ever really given me this stuff in order to get what I got. God's done it. And so I really do appreciate you sharing that, because it was, yeah, I mean, it's spot on. It's spot on. So, here's the question I want to ask you, though. Kind of going a little bit more into it. You talk about this idea of how, like, and you tell a little bit, if you want to, the story about, man, how when we carry trauma, I never, you're talking to your therapist, and he talks about, man, it's like your bones being broken. You know what I'm saying? Like, over and over again. Can you unpack that? Because I was reading that, and I was just like, I'm like, you've put words to how I have felt for so long. I'm like, it does feel like that. Yeah. And so you really did a good job. Can you unpack that, kind of your even story in that, and just kind of really what you kind of got out of that? Yeah.
So for those listening, I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and a lot of it was the cliches. I was born in 1980, graduated high school in 1998, and that's all I knew. So for 18 years, you're growing up in a place where, it's during the BMF Black Mafia family, who was known for selling, like, the most crack during that time. So you got East Side, West Side. We're the only place that celebrates Halloween by burning abandoned buildings, and we call it Devil's Night. Gang infested neighborhoods, people. I remember when Mike Vick got busted for dogfighting. I go, like, people don't dogfight? It's just like, oh, that's a crime. Yeah, like, just stuff like that, And I would say my though I come from a broken home, my parents weren't violent towards each other, but it was violent in the streets. Like, it was high stress. Once you went out that door, and you don't know it's stress until you sit down with a counselor, but it's high stress. Like, yo, should I wear this? Am I going to get jumped for this? Right. Don't look too soft. Have a hard face. No micro expressions. They going to test me today. You got to practice your 1-2 duck, like, oh, I'm going to do this. If they got a weapon, I got to do this. Like, man, you got to check to see if they got this many people, or they boys with you. Do you have your boys at this time? Like, I mean, it was stressful, y'all. Like, then you taking the city transportation, drug dealers, pimps. You got neighborhood, we didn't have gangs, but we had neighborhood sets. They're kind of like gangs, but didn't wear colors. So you going through the Dexter neighborhood, then you get the Cass Corridor. It was the worst place at that time. They call it Crack Corridor. That's where I went to high school. So you're going through all that, and you feel like this pain, or this overwhelming element in your chest your entire life. You got to endure, move on, just keep your head down. And then fast forward, I sit down in a chair at 37, and I'm just telling the counselor this story. And my parents did divorce when I was 12, and my mom was severely shot 5 times. She survived, but she was shot 5 times. So he was saying, you're going through all that. You got this divorce. You got your mom. Your brother's 15. He got to take care of you. It's just so much to navigate. You go through that for 37 years. You sit into the counselor's chair, and he says, I'm surprised you're still alive. And he says, I'm not talking about violence. I'm just talking about the emotional weight of it all. And then I was like, man, what does that mean? And then he went to explain, like, if you break a femur, the body feels such a severe pain that it needs time to heal from that pain. But if I keep breaking that femur every day, or if I keep breaking that femur every 3 hours, which is the case of what you experience roughly about every 3 hours, is like your body would just collapse because it's too much pain. And then he goes, therefore, I'm surprised you're still alive. Like, God wants you alive, because I've seen people die of less because of that. Holding that, just really holding that their entire lives. Like, you should have had a heart attack. You know what's interesting about that, though? I had a friend. At 22, he was 25. Same situation. He actually did pass at 25.
Wow.
And the autopsy comes back like they couldn't find anything. Right. So I always remember that. And then he passed when I was 22. A friend was 25. So 15 years later, I was sitting in a chair. When he told me that, I go, that's why Chris passed.
Mm.
You see what I'm saying? So that's when he says, I'm surprised you're still alive. I'm like, man, I got a receipt right here.
Yeah.
Wow. No, yeah. And that's one of the things is you give a lot of credit to your, your therapist. Mine is a guy who's very close to us, Dr. Mike Zoda. And one of the things, that's what Doc, it's funny. He said the same, we said in different words. He said the same thing to me. I walked in there. He was like, and I never thought of it. It's just going on. He's like, I don't think you realize the capacity that you have in you, because not only did I do, I didn't have as of a, though it was always there, because I went to, the friends I hung out with, you always had the survival side of it. But I think the other side of it, I had the emotional side of it. I struggled with depression and all those things. So it's like you carry it and you just don't realize how much pain you're in. That's why when people I'm like, I don't understand. People are like, oh, like not being pain. I'm like, that's just how I live. I don't know any other way. But that's just like, I was like, oh, that's pain. You don't even realize it's pain. You're just like, oh, it's just normal. And then he's like, so you feel like this? I'm like, yeah, all the time. Mm-hmm. And then realize I'm like, oh, I don't have to do that or whatever. And then you're 100% right how it affects like raising your kids, or how I interacted with my interacting with my wife and all those things, because I'm just constantly in this place of like, just survival and caring. Like, am I enough? Am I not enough? I'm a black man. Am I doing that? And then on top, and so it is such a real thing. And I think that's what really spoke to me when you said that. I was like, it was just another, again, one of those moments where you get like a story that helps you get a greater understanding of what you walk through. And I tell people, it doesn't take the pain away, but it actually helps you heal, because you actually are hearing like, oh, I can resonate with that. So I really appreciate that part.
You know what you up against. I think that helped me understand what I'm up against. And then it also helped me say, like, look, I've been keeping all this stuff in to make it. That was the what I was told, you got to make it. Mm-hmm. But then you look at like, the Whitney Houstons and the Bobby Browns, the Michael Jacksons. And it's almost like the dude in Proverbs where it says, I walk past the field of the sluggard and a man lacking sense, and I instructed myself, a little sleep, a little slumber. Mm-hmm. You just was like, I don't want to make it if it's going to be at the expense of my humanity.
Wow.
So, so you do a person, like, I don't know if y'all, if you Google, you may see some old images of me, like with a bald head, clean shaven. Those were the days where I was trying to make it, but it was killing me. So I was like, look, I'm gonna grow my hair out. I'm gonna have this goatee, and like, I'm gonna be at peace.
Yeah.
But and I'm still gonna love people, so I'm not saying like being your fullest self is not trying to be warm, but at the same time, like people would tell me like, hey man, you gotta change the way you dress, and I go, why? Because that person doesn't feel comfortable praying with you. I'm like, because of the clothes I have on, like that's the stuff people don't realize. Oh man, this stuff happened from elders of churches.
Yeah. Wow.
Like, so when I say you have permission, I go, wear it. And then you got to expand people's understanding of humanity. Don't conform to theirs, because they don't grow, and then they miss out on the beauty of what God placed in you to help them see him.
Yeah.
Man, the way you wrote the book, is beautiful because I caught the rhythm of, okay, he's going to give me a story and he's going to give me some cheat codes. But a lot of times before the cheat codes, you would talk about the black card. And so every time I kept reading that, I kept thinking about the ways in which, at least in my opinion, the black card has been commodified. Prison system, hip hop, things like that. Would you agree with that? Like, man, there's, because I thought you were kind of alluding to it earlier. This black card, it gets commodified. You can make money off of it. Do you agree with that, or why not?
It does, man. You can make a lot of money off of the proverbial black card. You know, you can make a lot of money. You get a lot. You can not have shame if your black card is quote unquote high enough. Then what happens, you know, you start to have this like division going between each other. And then it becomes what I would call our modern day version of Mandingo fights, which are real, where you just start fighting against each other. Who has more trauma? Who has more, you know, bullet cases or whatever? Who's had it harder? Well, I grew up harder than you. And yeah, you'll see labels, movies, people. They'll use it because one of my, in the words of one of my good friends, he says, people want to give to stories that have bullet wounds in them. He said they tend not to give to people who are faithful, of character. He goes, but if you go out and get shot and you make it and you live in this home, it's like they're gonna give you millions of dollars because they want to tell that story.
Wow.
So I totally agree, and I think we have to expand that narrative of what it means to be, you know, black, so to speak. I would say just in our lived experiences, and then not attach that to, well, I can't get resources unless I'm this type of black. And that still is a problem.
Yeah. Yes, it is. It really, it's 100%.
What do you mean?
When you say this type of black?
Yeah.
I mean, I would think you would say how I take it, and you may have a different take. How I take it is that, you know, you jump in and it's like, man, if you aren't as threatening, you know, you're not as threatening to those who would perceive have power. You come in, you kind of fit in, you talk a certain way, you do a certain thing, you kind of verse it, and then you kind of become something that you're not, you know, to kind of like to fit in. And the truth be told, we were taught that growing up. We were taught, hey, you come in, man, you gotta be twice as good, how you dress, and da. And I mean, that's the reason why sometimes it trips people out. Like one of our elders is and he is who he is, and again, in a great way, you know, he's a black man, went to Harvard, and he loves this because we go to meetings with people, and you know, and he grew up, and this is who he is. He dresses really nice, but not to fit in. That's just who he is. I show up to a meeting, and we're meeting with $1 million investors. I'm showing up with black tee. You know what I'm saying? Black tee, jeans, sweats, and whatever type of Jordan 1s, whatever I'm wearing. And he was like, and he said to me one time, he's like, man, I appreciate your freedom and liberty to do that. I was like, because if I walk into a room and I got to do that in order for you to take me serious of that I'm good enough to invest in or do this, I'm like, then we keep it moving, because I'm like, that's just not me. And here's the other thing too. Our ancestors didn't march and do all that stuff. So I still have to do that. Like, I mean, they did all this stuff like that. And then I tell people too, because my dad used to say, oh man, you know how you dress matters. I'm like, man, people was out there in 3-piece suits. And they was coming across y'all head with 3-piece suits on. And you talking about how I dress. I'm like, man, like, come on, man. Like, I'm like,
John Lewis had a whole trench coat on.
Right.
Y'all still go back and look at that picture on the pages, but a whole trench coat and some slacks, bro. Just to bring home your point.
Hey, that's what I'm saying. Them dudes back there, I was like, listen, I'm telling you right now, I don't know. I was joking with somebody one time, like, man, I walk outside, how hot it is. Them brothers out there full suit. I'm like, man, y'all didn't have like no civil rights summer suit or something like that, like a short sleeve tee or something. Man, you know what I'm saying?
Civil rights Dr. Scholes and
them brothers out there full suited. I was like, that's one reason why I never would have been a Muslim. You know, everybody said bean pies, and they show up to the street and they be full. I'm like, I literally never get dude showed up. And, you know, he trying to sell me a final call and a bean pie, and I'll never get this. It probably was real rude. I was like, brother, like, y'all probably got like no t-shirts or something y'all can wear. Like I'm like, I get it. Like I'm like, it's too hot out here. I'm like, I'll just go to hell because it's too hot, man. Like,
sign me up in the fall. In the fall.
Hey, I do want to ask you this, man. Is again because you have, I know some of the other work that you've done, especially within the Jesus space. The permission to be black, but then also being in, I know you've operated in multi-ethnic spaces. One of the things that we have seen, again, is a mass exodus right now of, black Christians from multi-ethnic spaces. I think what happened, people woke up to the reality of like, man, I kind of explained it like, man, I thought I had, man, people's okay with us sitting in the living room, but when you start trying to move the furniture around for a better view, you're like, oh, no, you can't really change that. You just sit in here. And so people have left.
Yeah,
I think, and here's what I realized too, some people have walked away from faith as a whole, and they've thrown Jesus out of it because of whatever. And I want you to kind of speak to that because I think there's some, it's like one of those things where it's this tension where I'm like, oh man, some people are leaving. And even a friend of mine, again, Tyler Burns and those guys, Jamar, leave loud and whatever. And I'm with it, and I get it. But I also think there's a dark side to that too. So I kind of want you to kind of speak a little bit to like what do you see among black people? Because again, we are called to be reconcilers.
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, man, I got a ton of thoughts.
Yeah, you can see it.
Well, here's funny. In Memphis, Tennessee, 2007, my first book was on racial reconciliation. Now, if you go back 2007, I'm not arrogant enough to say I inspired this, but Piper sparks this whole multi-ethnic writing movement with the book Bloodlines.
Yep.
So we were talking about, the book I wrote was called Red Revolution, seeing the world through the lens of Christ. And it was about multi-ethnic church and movement. Man, I read that thing. I've been reading that thing this year, man. That mug is tough to read. I ain't even gonna lie, bro. One, seeing my youth, but two, seeing the multi-ethnic, to me, it's more nuanced than getting ethnicities in church on Sunday. And what I've discovered is that multi-ethnic in color doesn't mean you're multi-ethnic in cultural expression, and we assume that both correlate.
Yeah.
Right. So this is what I realize is that even in the American church, multi-ethnic is more assimilate into one another's culture. Like somebody's gonna have to assimilate, and then on the brochure we just have color diversity. But the umbrella is somebody's culture. It's still homogeneity when it comes to culture.
Wow.
And that's what people are feeling under the surface. They may not have the words to say that. So to put my cards on the table, I do believe we are called to be reconcilers, but I think we have to ask the question, do we eisegete what it was meant when it was said during that time from what we see in our time? And that's tough. Like, say, for instance, if I read the word community in the scriptures, do we eisegete? Do we put into the text what we think community is versus what they thought? Like, are we fighting for that? So even when I use the term reconcile, I go, well, at that time, that's a business term. That's really more of an agricultural business term. They were agrarian people, so they're trying to reconcile accounts. Like, you may owe some grain to this person, you may owe some cattle to this person, right? You go back to Leviticus and Deuteronomy. So when they say reconcile, you got to reconcile that, hey man, you did not return the cattle, or you walked past this ox and you let it die. You didn't pull it out the ditch, or you gleaned to the edges of the field and you weren't supposed to do that. So you got to reconcile that. Right? Zacchaeus, you got to pay back fourfold. That's reconciling the accounts. Right? And so when you look at America, if you're going from that lens, when we're talking about be reconcilers, what does that mean? Because those terms were actually, they're being used in a way that I don't think we are using them. So here's the point. if we even want to go with our connotation, then you ask the question, were we ever whole? I mean, you can make we were whole from God's perspective before we came out the womb, but if we're just talking from a standpoint of, most of the time how blacks and whites relate to each other, there's never a time where we were whole in America. We were brought here. Like if the slave trade never happens, we're on the continent of Africa. They're in Europe. We remain the power that we are. And then y'all got to do business with us in a way that respects our gold, our resources. So if we're talking about reconciling in America, again, it's in America, we weren't brought here in a whole relationship. So my problem with the church is they have yet to reconcile when they have both hands in the slave trade and still live off of the blood money today. But then they want to preach a gospel that takes into account past sins in the present, but then say we don't want to look at the past in the present. We just want to focus on the present and the future. I go, you're picking philosophically how you live. Your whole gospel is about the past, but you want to ignore the past. So which one is it? You don't want to ignore it when it comes to your sin, but you want to ignore it when it comes to the history of the sin of how this institution built this well. And this is me. Y'all hear me? My information is out there.
Oh, here we go. We got you. You cut it off for 1 second, and then I was like, "Oh man," but you good though. Keep going.
Y'all can shout as much as you want. You can do as many fasts as you want. God will not bring his full blessing until we reconcile that blood of 400 years that was spilled of his image bearers, and the church was at the center of it. It's anti his character, and you cannot find a place in scripture where he let that ride. From Cain to Abel, your brother's blood cries out from the ground. Do you know? And this is why I think God tends to bless organizations. I'll just give you the secret. Take Brian Stevenson. The fact that he recognized the blood of brown bodies cries out from the ground in the trees. So I'm just going to build a memorial. God is flooding the resources because what is due people is at least a human recognition that you were dishonored. So here you have a whole church saying you honor God who before he told us to do anything, what did he do? He created us. Before he told us anything. So people want to see, you can't sing it away. You can't pray it away. You can't donate it away. He created us. And there were too many children, too many women, too many men that were just dehumanized and treated in a vile way for us to say that was then, this is now. And that's how a lot of people live, Black people included. And God is just like, y'all can do what you want. I'm merciful, but I'm not going to give y'all my maximized blessing until y'all deal with this. So do I believe in reconciliation? I do once the accounts are reconciled.
So here's the question. Then no, and I appreciate that. I think the question I would ask you is say, okay, and again, I know we coming close to the end. Like, how do you? So what does that practically look like?
Yeah.
Like, because I mean, I agree. Like, so like, because for us, we here on Street Theology. So what you said was, again, I love it. It was a 30,000-foot view.
Right.
Now it's like, okay, we bring it to the street. What does that look like for a local church?
Yeah. Can I tag on to that question? Just because in my head, I'm also thinking about what each person has to play, because I know earlier we talked about systems, like we can't depend on a system to do certain things for us. And I know some people also have a tendency to look at the church as a system, and I feel like we have different rules for it. Like, I want justice from the American system, but then in the church context, I'm fine to approach it this way. Like, even there, yeah.
So it's more like, I can't, there's a local church and there's like the individual that has to do it. But I think, from just a practical level, if it's just an institution locally or a individual, how do we kind of like, how do you approach to do that?
And you may have a follow-up question after this. I would say every individual if you read the human story and you call yourself a citizen of God's kingdom, there's no other thing you should give your attention to until what happened on this soil is reconciled. So if there are white institutions, which I know of, and out of mercy, I'm not going to name them, but there are white institutions that are very prominent that have $200 million left over each year, and they don't know what to do with the money. Conversely, I know brown people who cannot find funds to plant churches. That's sinful, especially when I know that same institution got its legacy off of the slave trade.
Wow.
So these are conversations that I've had. Y'all, I'm not talking about theory here. I've talked to presidents of institutions, and I've said, and they're like, man, we trying to focus on that and other things. And I said, pause, Mr. President, a prestigious institution. There's nothing else you need to focus on. Do you realize you don't have an institution without my ancestors' blood? Do you realize you don't have an institution without you selling my ancestors' children away from them, never to be seen again in the flesh? See, here's one problem I have. This is a soapbox of mine. We're so fast in our culture that we don't sit in the pain of what it would have meant if I'm a man who's married to a woman who has 3 kids, and then the next day she's gone, and for the rest of my life she doesn't ever get to no explanation, and then the next day she's being raped until she's in her 70s and 80s. Yeah, we need to sit in that sting. And then the kids are like, yo, where's my mother and father? And then now they're sold off. We're making it. You talking about street? Part of my language, I can use some street for your ass.
Yeah.
We not bringing that to the emotional street level. This happened over centuries, y'all.
Yeah.
And y'all want to tell me that you just tell people just to get up and sing some songs?
Wow.
Nah, bro. Y'all wondering why God is like, nah. So from the street level, I go, there's nothing else we need to focus on. I'm talking about some old school. I mean, you can look up the 1995 articles of the Southern Baptist Convention. They haven't done nothing with that. That's one of the main organizations, Blood Money.
Yeah.
They've done nothing with it. Well, we trying to redeem it. You go to South Africa. You know what they like, believers are like over in South Africa? They're like, give us the land or else. These are people in the name of the Lord that have taken land from people, like with bulldozers, moving them off. And then they'll say, like, yeah, I know my ancestors stole the land. What should I do? I go, give it back. Well, you know, we didn't build our family. No, give it back. And listen to me. I can go chapter and verse when that's happened in the scriptures. God's blessing pours from heaven, but we're so tied to what Mammon gives us. We're so tied to comfort.
There you go.
We want to find every other way but the actual biblical way.
Wow.
There you go. No,
so
and let me tell you this.
We got to be those voices. Just the tangible say, we got to be those voices. We got to move in numbers and say, I will not sell out. I will until this changes. And that's one thing I was saying to civil rights is that they were so oppressed and they were so uncomfortable that they were connected. We're so free and so fed and so fat. We're not united enough to even bring about this change I'm talking about.
Wow.
Let me tell you this. And let's begin. My father, let me tell you right now, my father said this to me, and I'll never forget. He said this to me years ago. And I looked at him and I was like, what are you talking about? And the older I get, the more it makes sense. He's like just talking about, there's not even talking about Christians, he's talking about like black people. He's like, Adrian, I think he's like one of the worst things that happened. He was like, when we went to integration and things like that into schools and everything like that, he's like, we no longer had anything to fight for together. Like as a people. And I was like, well, he's like, I'm not saying it hasn't been good. I'm not saying that. He's like, but what I am trying to say is like, but it's lost. Like before, you all had a common thing you fought for. Now it became where you know, and I think even in the church world, I would agree, because that's one thing I always say in the church world. I think the church world, one of the biggest things, and that's one of the things we fight really hard here. What we do is that, you know, we planted a church. It was 18 of us with 10 grand. You know what I'm saying? I'm still bivocational because I feel called to do it. And the reason why I do is because I think it's a travesty of how much money are put into churches, and and it doesn't really make, and they go into certain places and it doesn't really make a lot of impact, and they're just dumping cash. I'm like, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. And it's because we have nothing we're going after. And I agree with you, where it's like, what are we going after to actually see a real change? And there are some people who are, where you're like, okay, no, how are we actually, because I tell people, nothing moves until when you start putting your money behind it, that's when it's real. The rest of it is just, it's just smoke and mirrors. And when you start putting money behind something, that's when it's real for you. And so,
man, that's powerful.
Like, I'll give you one thing that kind of grieves my heart. If you go to that Equal Justice Initiative Memorial, you'll see these slabs, you'll see the names, and then they have duplicate slabs out back. I asked the question, hey, what are these duplicate slabs representative of? They say, oh, we're hoping that the counties and places where these people were lynched, that the county would spend money to bring these slabs back and create a memorial and bring some, reconciliation and some restitution. I go, how many slabs do you have? Over 800. How many slabs are still here? Over 800. So I go, you mean to tell me since this thing, no one has come to claim a slab? They go, no. You know what I think of? Churches. I got to think of churches who are in those counties. I go, now why has no church who understands the history and understands legacy, stones of remembrance, memorials, the cross, like all this stuff, nobody's led that charge? It's those things. Like I go, it's those things.
Right.
Well, man, we could go on and on. I'm going to say talk to you for the next 3 hours or so. I mean, it was like, there's so many questions, but like, I wouldn't tell you this, but again, just be respecting your time. I really appreciate the work that you're doing, the things that you put out there, being unashamed. I mean, and I was with a group of friends of mine, black pastors. I mean, I've got my white pastor friends. I'm handing this book to them and letting them read it and do it, just because I appreciate you for the willingness to do it, because it even gave me even more liberation, like on the journey, you know what I'm saying, to do that. And I think, and so I know, a lot of times they talk about get somebody, the flowers where they can smell it. So I just want to make sure you get yours, while you can smell it, because it was really helpful. And I think even generations coming up, it helped me. And I'll end here, man. It really helped me with my own son. You know what I'm saying? I got a 6-year-old black son that I'm raising, and realizing, like, man, sometimes my even parenting, I still parent him out of the trauma and the shadows of stuff that happened, and realizing, no, I want to give him the freedom to be who he is, and like, hey, and let, and I think that's some of the reason why I work as hard as I do, because I'm like, no, I want you to be able to have the access freedom that you can be who you are, and you ain't got to worry about nobody else, because at the end of the day, this is going to do. And so I really appreciate you, man. I appreciate all the work that you've done and continue to do.
Yeah.
I appreciate you all. I appreciate you reading. I can tell you I read it. And the story, like, I was interviewed, somebody asked me, who do you want to get this? And I said, every person of color who comes from this legacy. And then I said, every man and woman in prison, because I should be that person. Like, like I'm not saying like, yo, I had every recipe, with father leaving at 12, vital age, mom getting shot, vital age, my brother, he don't have a manual, and you going through all these things. By God's grace, he put certain fears in me to not, that's why I didn't sell drugs, but that was presented. He put certain fears in me to not join gangs, but it was presented. And I have friends who did that. But it's just like, man, I don't know if I'm really about that life. I throw a punch every now and then, right? But when I go to these prisons and I see the it's not even just hurt. It's like, how come he ain't stick around? What else do y'all think I'm supposed to do with no manual? Like, when I see it, I go, I understand that.
Wow.
I really understand that. And so the only thing I would ask is like literal prayers, like divine prayers, where you ask the divine Holy Spirit to move. I want people to feel the freedom, like outside, but also inside of prison. And a guy contacted me from prison. I don't know how that mug got there, but my book got to prison, and he sent me a DM and then a letter just talking about how it changed his life. And I'll be honest with y'all, you would have thought I was a New York Times bestseller or a Pulitzer Prize. Because I just understand it, man.
Yeah.
You know, so I appreciate y'all reading, because I honestly feel like this is this is not an old conversation. And sometimes people treat it as like, I go, nah, we haven't been transparent enough and free enough to even talk about this. So that's one of the reasons why I try to roll myself under the bus and go like, I ain't want to live. And he helped me realize why.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, and I believe a ton of y'all don't want to live. Y'all just can't. Y'all don't have the permission. But I do think there's freedom, wholeness, healing, and hope. But we gotta let it out. So now when I say I appreciate y'all reading, I feel like this was a revelation and out of obedience to write this. So bless y'all.